Welcome to In the Lobby, a brand new vertical of the Friday Reporter. I'm Lisa, your guide to where policy meets persuasion and strategy shapes society. Each week, we're pulling back the curtain on the fascinating world of lobbying. We'll sit down with some of the sharpest minds in the industry, those who navigate the intersections of government, business, and advocacy, to learn about what's driving decisions in Washington and beyond. From unpacking the art of influence to diving deep into the most pressing issues of the day, In the Lobby's your backstage pass to the stories and strategies that rarely make headlines. So grab a seat, settle in, and join me as we explore the power of connection, the pulse of policymaking, and the people behind the process. Let's get into it. Hello, and thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the Friday Reporter In the Lobby vertical. I'm joined today by Cori Kramer. She is the CEO of Center Forward, has a tremendous charge at Center Forward, and has a dynamite background. And I cannot wait to have you hear more from my guest today. Cori, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Lisa. So thrilled to be here.
So, Cori, tell us a little bit about Center Forward and the organization itself in terms of the charge and what you guys do every day.
Absolutely. Well, Center Forward, we're actually celebrating our 15th anniversary this year, and it's been a great time for reflection and also planning for the future. But the mission of Center Forward has remained consistent throughout that time, and it is about creating opportunities for bipartisan engagement and pragmatic problem solving. How can we create solutions that are stable and lasting? And in our mind, that comes from bipartisan engagement and solutions from elected leaders, industry experts, academics, nonprofits, all of those people who have a stake and a voice along with the American voters in how this country moves forward and prospers. We do that in a variety of ways. Primarily, it's through convening. So we will, for instance, last year we convened 95 different events and 7 conferences, both domestically and internationally. And again, it's with the notion of creating a safe space for people to engage, create relationships, and humanize each other, not just demonize, which is where we often find ourselves these days, demonizing the other side of the aisle.
I'm going to put a pause on this. Dylan, let me pause for just 1 minute. I have a dog who's Cori, when you started this, when you first got started, when Center Forward really got started, bipartisanship was not just an aspiration, but it really was the definition of success inside of Washington, D.C. But over the course of time, it has really become increasingly difficult to find common ground from my point of view as a communications person. I'm hoping that you're going to shed some light on where people are finding community and are finding ways to work together. Tell me a little bit about that evolution for the organization and what you're seeing now.
Sure. I mean, you're right, Lisa. It does look different. And I've been in this business for moving on to 3 decades pretty soon. And the definition of bipartisanship, the idea of being a moderate or a centrist, really has shifted. It is less these days an ideology and more about approach. How do you approach different challenges? And I think where we're seeing the difference in bipartisan engagement, it's no longer about tackling a huge piece of legislation, reforming immigration, for example.
Right.
It's about tackling smaller bits, more niche areas, and carving out spaces where there can be agreement and compromise. I think the thing that a number of you on the communication side of things struggle with, and also maybe experience a lack of awareness, is because bipartisanship and centrism, it's not sexy. The center isn't sexy, we often say.
Okay.
And so there's no throwing of bombs and lighting things on fire. It's really about people putting their heads down and getting to work and finding those things and those opportunities. So I think that's really how bipartisanship and people who are wanting to work in the center on moderate and in moderate ways has really changed over the not just 15 years of Center Forward, but in the last couple of decades as well.
Yeah, and that really tracks. I mean, I think more than ever before, if things are actually working, it doesn't even rise to the level for news and news outlets to care about it, right? So I guess that's really that's good news too, because maybe the work can happen behind the scenes and happen in a place where maybe it doesn't rise up to the level, but it means good things are happening because the news is staying out of the way.
Possibly. And I think you're the expert in this space, but the course of media, the way it has changed and shifted in the last 15 to 30 years is extraordinarily different. And not always, but there is often a race for clicks and there's a race for viewership and what are the numbers and what are the stats and how are we going to hit those things as media outlets. And those can often create different driver on what to cover, how to cover, for better or for worse. And there are things that are, you know, great and about the media that is new and fresh in the last few years. And there are things that I think we would all agree have maybe not been for the best. There's pros and cons to change and evolution of an industry.
No doubt.
And I think you're right, though. The coverage is not necessarily always there. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand, the nature of bipartisanship now and also the nature of the media.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but I think that really makes a ton of sense. You have been there for some time, and just recently, I know I've read a little bit about some work that you've done specifically, sort of diving deeper into some of this. I know that you've had some news coverage. Congratulations in a difficult
Oh,
time.
thanks. Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about that work.
sure. We were really looking towards the last half of last year to do something different in the research space. There's oftentimes the typical type of polling that people see. It's called quantitative, and it's, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to feel about the economy? You know, you somewhat disagree. Do you completely disagree? What are the, you know, there's different rankings, and that's called quantitative research. There's also focus groups that often happen, and that's called qualitative research. And both of those things have extraordinary value. But I was looking to do something a little bit deeper. And while I'm a bit of a polling and research nerd and I love watching focus groups, the one challenge I have with focus groups is when you get a dozen people in a room, whether it be virtual or in person, oftentimes a group think comes about and people start to play off of each other and echo, and it becomes the true echo, a true echo chamber. And so what we did was we designed this research project in a way that we could deep dive with people and have that qualitative aspect, but without the groupthink mentality that often comes from focus groups. So what we did was we created 3 phases and we recruited 38 voters across the country, balanced across demographic, geographic, uh, all the different age components that you could imagine, men, women, partisanship, independence. And we said, we want to talk to you and we want you to diary for us. We want to give you questions, 10 or 12 questions, and we want you to diary for us over the course of a couple of days. We want you to do that before the election, and then we want to come back to you after the election. And then we want to come back to you in the new year after a new administration. At the time, we didn't know if it was going to be a Harris administration or a Trump administration. We're going to come back to you a third time, a few weeks or months into a new administration. And we want to talk to you again. And we want to see how you feel and how things evolve. And what I was really looking for in this research was not how did they feel on specific issues. Now, their thoughts on the economy or their thoughts on immigration and foreign affairs naturally came up. But what I really wanted to look at was how do we, as Americans, let politics and what's happening in the government affect our daily lives in regards to relationships with family, friends, neighbors, colleagues? Is it changing how we consume news? Is it changing our engagement on social media? And is it changing our engagement with other fellow Americans? And we found that it really, really is.
Hmm.
I'm happy to dive into any part of that, but that's just a sort of a big picture of what we were working on.
I love that.
Because specifically, I feel as if, well, especially it's critical this election alone because of so many contours and variables that were new to the discussion. But I love that you went back at the beginning, during, and then after. I love that timing because I'm curious to know, was there a big change in that the point of view or the research or the way they were consuming their information over that course of time? I mean, as a focus group of one, I can tell you that I have changed my behavior around those kinds of things. So I'm curious to know what you found.
So, we found that there was significant disengagement from media consumption. There
Yeah.
is a frustration with the media. And I was hoping that in phase 3, we were going to see a rebound because there
Mhm.
was true disengagement, social media engagement, engagement with friends and family, but also with the media and how they were getting their news. As of the end of February, beginning of March, we have not seen it bouncing back yet.
Mm.
Um, we are looking at doing phase 4 and phase 5 of this research. And so I'll be curious if after a little bit more time has passed, people are starting to make that connection once again. And I will
Mhm.
say, I think one of the things that was really remarkable about this group of people, we started with 38 folks in phase 1. Those exact same 38 folks came back for phase 2.
That's
And then
great.
for phase 3, 35 of them came back. And
Wow.
as you know, with polling and research, retention over time of the same subjects is extraordinarily difficult.
Yes.
And I really have to hand it to the bipartisan polling teams that we work with, which is Breakthrough Campaigns and GS Strategy Group. They were amazing. And I think this really speaks to not only their hard work, but the inclination of these voters to be heard in this particular way.
That's awesome because it is difficult, especially because of the real separation between where people are. I love that you say too, you were careful to not only get the bipartisan representation, age representation, geographic representation. What is one party in one state is not quite the same, and so that to
Absolutely.
me is very representative, and that's so cool that you did that. I know, especially now, it's great that you'll do that over the course of the next, another 2 phases too, because I feel as if even the folks that I talk to, a lot of folks have disengaged from media because, in fact, it can be really triggering. There's a lot of information there, regardless of
So
how you feel, Republican, Democrat, age-wise, female, male, all of those pieces. Um, I'm curious, how are you rolling out that information now? How are you getting and who are you communicating it to? Are you communicating it to your membership? Are people using that information for talk a little bit about how it then gets applied based on the information you gather?
absolutely. So as we sort of touched on a little, at the top of this conversation, we've been doing conversations with folks like yourself and sharing the results. We have been doing a number of private briefings as well, not just with the membership of Center Forward, but also with elected officials and folks who are involved in the policy influencer space. Additionally, we've been communicating this digitally through social media platforms, our website, email distribution. We've been trying to, because it's a lot of data. It's a lot of data and it's a lot to digest and understand. And so we've been trying to break it down in smaller parts because when you're talking about the overall trends and feelings of overwhelming anxiety about politics and the economy, pessimism about the direction of the country, some of the negative feelings that have really come up through this research, it's a lot to really wrap your arms around. And so we're trying to break it up in ways that are consumable for folks.
Does it help them then decide where they're going to bring their messages? So if people are not consuming information, if a specific age group is not consuming information online, is that the way that they are digesting the data, or is every audience a little bit different?
Every audience is a little bit different. I think for elected officials that I've talked to, and honestly, just policy influencers in general, we sort of find ourselves in a bit of a bubble, and oftentimes think we know where the American voters' headspace is. And sometimes we may be right, but sometimes we may also be wrong. And when you have this direct, it's not just numbers you're looking at. You're not looking at trend lines here. We're not looking at, graphs over time. It is really direct quotes, whether it be video or written responses that you're hearing straight from the American voters' mouths. And I think it's compelling in a very different way. And it also hits a little bit different when people talk about how their relationships have changed based on the angst and controversy or the anxiety that they feel. One that will really truly stick with me is this a female voter responded that she and her husband used to have a rule, no politics discussion in the car. And now they have a rule, no politics discussion at all, because they are on opposite sides of so many issues. And she was really vulnerable and expressed that she did not know the direction of their relationship and how things might heal or turn or change in their relationship because the conflict had gotten to be so much between them. And that really hit me in a very significant and compelling way. And I think that sort of response is the thing that's different about this when we are sharing the data that we've received for folks. It's hitting different for people who are hearing it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I can't say I'm too terribly surprised, but I feel like I hear these stories, neighbors that can no longer communicate, friends that were friends for life, no longer connecting.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I don't want to be a complete Debbie Downer. There are some positive things that come out of it. So
Okay.
we can circle back to that if you want, but there are some highlights.
I am going to come back to the highlights because I want to.
Okay, great.
And because we're going to leave it on a high note, but I want to know, you mentioned earlier that you're a polling and data person yourself by nature. Tell me a little bit about how it is you became someone that was interested in this kind of work.
So human nature is fascinating to me, and there's so many different ways to look at it and quantify it. And I don't know, I just, over the course of my career, have kind of become a little bit of a research and polling nerd. I mean, probably more times than I should admit to, I've fallen asleep with a book of crosstabs over the years, just looking at those trends and seeing where things fall. Prior to my life at Center Forward, I spent many, many years running campaigns, being chief of staff to members of Congress on the Hill, all in very swing districts, very, very, very purple districts. So this space is very not just comfortable for me, but I was raised in a house divided, partisan house divided. My father was Republican, my mom was a Democrat. And so this is just sort of my home, always has been.
How about
that? Yeah, it's funny how that sort of bleeds into
great.
The rest of my life. Yeah.
I love it because I think that number one, all of us are a little bit of the Washington, D.C. set in general, or sort of, we find ourselves in these niches and then we really get into it. But it's, I think, the value that we bring in these jobs. So you were on Capitol Hill, bipartisan house. That's fun. But then, so now you bring this great point of view to Center Forward. And you're interviewing and talking to a variety of different folks. Are you finding that that the work itself, because it is so incredibly powerful this time in general, is just sort of politically charged. Are you finding that there is an open mind from the people that you talk to when you get out and you share this information? I feel like everybody is really, more than ever, curious about polling and curious
Mhm.
about people's insights, but the polling industry itself has taken a little bit of a hit, right? Because there has been such a shift and a change in trying to identify sentiment because it's become more difficult. So that's a question wrapped in a question. But the question is, tell me a little bit about sort of how people are receiving this information at a time when polling itself is challenged.
I think the reception has been overwhelmingly positive, and you're right. The polling industry has faced a number of challenges, and they're 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 better to be addressed by someone who's more of an expert than I am. But being able to reach voters, contact voters, people, what they're willing to disclose to a stranger on the phone or in an online survey, lots of challenges face the polling industry. And they continue to educate themselves and evolve and course correct over time. And they're doing some amazing things. But I believe that the response to the way that we conducted this research has been so positive. It's because it is refreshing.
Right.
And it's really hard to argue with when you're reading the content of direct interviews and diarying from these voters. It's hard to push back on that. Now, the interpretation of that and what the trends are that are involved, there's a science and an art to that. And that's where our researchers really come into play. But there's also a part of it that just can't be argued with. And it's it's a refreshing twist on what you and I and the rest of us in our industry have become accustomed to as far as traditional polling.
And it seems that way because you've identified 38 and
Mhm.
up until, the last round, which still was 35 of the 38,
Right.
you've had a regular conversation with this. So you're building trust with this
Yes.
group too. So they trust you, they've shared information with you. And I would imagine that for phase 4 and phase 5, your hope is that that group will continue on, which is a
Absolutely.
really cool way to think about polling and generating sort of a point of view or a sort of sentiment in a moment of time that hasn't necessarily been captured in traditional polling. So that to me seems like just a new, interesting way to try to elicit where people's minds and hearts are.
I completely agree. And you're right. We will go back to those same folks. Hopefully, they will be willing to continue the conversation with us. The the thing that I took back from the retention rate from each of the phases is that these people wanted to be heard. We were asking them questions that really resonated with them because it's not an insignificant amount of time that we were asking them for. It wasn't a 15 to 20-minute phone survey. It was time out of their day. And really, they put a great deal of thought into it and corresponding corresponding with us. We would ask follow-up questions when something piqued our interest. And they they wanted to be heard on this. And it was something that touched them in a way that I think may have surprised them as well. And there's often, I think in human nature, there's there's sort of a natural response to things. And you it's sort of what your gut instinct tells you. But schedules are so busy, life is so busy to really take the time to reflect and put words to those emotions and those feelings and your relationships, how you're engaging isn't something that we often do. And I think it was a unique opportunity for these folks to really put some thought behind their gut instincts or their gut reactions and engagements that they were having.
And it also seems to me, anytime that you and I have been surveyed, it is usually a one and done. So the
Mhm.
fact that you've come back to them, they've really vested their time in this too. So they want to see the
Absolutely.
process progress. To me, that's sort of my outside perspective. But you mentioned that there were some highlights, some good
Yes.
positives out of this. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, there is, despite a pessimism about current state of the country and politics and media and worry about their own personal engagements and relationships, there is still a sense of civic duty
Sure.
in the process and the desire to be a part of the process and vote and have their voice heard. There's also indications of, even despite this very political time that we were surveying through, moments of community that they volunteered. And that could have been around things like LA fires or the DC plane crash that we experienced during that time when we were conducting this research.
Mhm.
Number of the respondents brought up those instances as something that brought people back together, brought a sense of community back to them, and was reassuring to them that that still existed. So that was a very positive takeaway. I think the other thing that I found, we talked with them quite a bit about, are there times you've had conversations with someone who's on an opposing side of an issue from you? And how did that go? How did it change your perspective? Did it change your perspective? And the interesting thing that we found, and a lot of people sort of chuckle at me when I say this, and because it's not rocket science. It's not something that should really knock you off your feet, but it was reassuring to me that those who went into a conversation trying to change the other person's position, trying to convince them of their side of the argument, did not find significant value in the interaction. But
Mhm.
those who went into the conversations and the engagements from a place of curiosity and looking to learn, whether they changed their mind or softened their opinion, it became irrelevant and to them. It was an engagement that they found value in, and they left that conversation with a deeper understanding. May not have changed their positions, but they had at least a deeper understanding.
Mhm.
And for an organization like Center Forward, where our entire mission and purpose since the founders birthed this organization 15 years ago is to create a sense of understanding and openness and dialogue and communication across parties. It was it was heartwarming to me to see that that could still take place, and
Mhm.
that the approach that we are taking as an organization, coming at coming at our interactions from a place of curiosity and understanding, is really the most valuable, produces the most valuable yield for the engagement.
That makes a ton of sense. And even if you take politics out of it, if you go into the conversation trying to talk to someone about changing their mind about which sports team they appreciate, it's probably not gonna be
Absolutely.
a great conversation. But if you have a
Right.
conversation about the history and your understanding of why they're a fan, that might be
Right.
kind of a better exchange. I mean,
Right.
take politics out of the equation for a moment. I think that that's probably inherently true of a lot of exchanges that you have with people that don't necessarily see your point of view.
You're so right. And if you ask the questions and come from a place of curiosity, why do you support this team that hasn't won a game in forever, who knows how long? And maybe that person says to you, well, the quarterback went to the same college that was in my hometown. And,
Mhm.
I feel a sense of connection with that person because we grew up in the same area, the same way. You learn something new and you have a deeper understanding and respect for the position that they're coming from. Again,
Mhm.
an effort to humanize and not demonize another side is really at the core of what we're trying to accomplish at Center Forward. And I think this is,
Awesome.
there was a good example of how best to go about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I hope that you will come back and see me for phase
I'd
4
love
and phase
to.
5, because I'd be curious to see what and how the evolution of their point of view has been. Cori, this is the fastest show ever. It goes
Oh
so
my
quick,
gosh, is the time
and
over
it's
already?
hard to believe. It is. But so promise you'll come back.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
And the last question of my conversation with on the Friday Reporter and in the
Okay.
lobby is always, who should I have as a future guest for the podcast?
Oh gosh. We just hosted this great event just this week, and it's with one of my favorite pairings, and it's the bipartisan co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And It's Representative Brian Fitzpatrick and Tom Suozzi, the Republican and Democrat. They are the new co-chairs, again, Problem Solvers Caucus. They really exemplify the sort of thing that Senator Ford is trying to do. Great elected officials, great voices for people who are trying to be pragmatic and getting things done, and just a good conversation. So I would recommend reach out to two of them. They're great.
That would be a great conversation. And like I said, it would go in a minute because it's the
would.
Show ever.
You might have to schedule more than just more than 30 minutes for those guys.
No doubt about it. Cori, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate you having me.
That's it for this episode of In the Lobby, where we connect you to the people and policy shaping our world. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with your network. It helps me bring these important stories to even more listeners. And if you'd like to get in touch, have a guest suggestion, or just want to say hello, you can reach me directly at lisa@fridayreporter.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time here on In the Lobby.